whenitwascool.com.
The Run DMC album. Basically, it's tricky.
Your source for retro pop culture fun.
You're a yuppie.
Patreon funded.
Hey everybody, this is Carl Stern here from whenitwascool.com. Thank you very much for joining us here. This show is brought to you by our wonderful Patreon supporters. Without our Patreon supporters, you would not be hearing this show. So, if you want to support this show, you want this show to continue coming out, first, where our look at first edition comic book character, not first edition, first issues of comic books, first appearances in comic books, not just comic books, but in popular culture, first of all kinds in popular culture. And today we're going to be talking about not the first time Godzilla was in popular culture, that was in the movies, not the first time he was even in comic books, but the first time he was in mainstream United States comic books was Godzilla, 1977 series. This came out at the same time the Shogun Warriors line of toys were hitting the toy shelves all over the United States. And, of course, Godzilla had a figure in that toy line. He had a fist that you could mash a button and it would fly off. He had a flame mechanism you could operate from the back of his neck. It looked like he was shooting out flames. His tail was removable. He was in scale to the other Shogun Warrior giant robots. It was a great time to be a Godzilla, be a Star Wars fan also in the 1970s, but also Godzilla. Godzilla was huge in my childhood. Man, every Saturday you could sit down, watch an action movie sequence, a kung fu movie starring Bruce Lee or one of his many knockoffs, or a Godzilla movie. That was just a Saturday tradition, and Godzilla was great. So to see him show up in the Marvel Universe, although he didn't stay there, Toho eventually took the license back after 12 issues of this comic. Periodically over the years, Godzilla or Godzilla-like creatures would pop up in the Marvel Universe. They just couldn't specifically say that until recently, where there's been a set of crossovers with various Marvel characters. Still, the 1977 Godzilla, pretty much ignored, kind of like Rom, the Space Knight, was kind of ignored out of continuity following his series, although it did spawn at least one giant robot. Red Ronin was a giant mech robot that was inspired from and in this series that stuck around the Marvel Universe after Godzilla left. Of course, S.H.I.E.L.D. was in this comic a lot as well, but S.H.I.E.L.D., very, very prominent in this particular comic book. And ultimately, Godzilla on his own is not enough to hold the fort down here, so to speak. They end up bringing the Fantastic Four and the Avengers both to participate in this here comic book. All right, Marvel's Godzilla #1 was cover dated August of 1977. So I turned 6 years old when this comic book came out. That's about perfect, right? Perfect age for Godzilla #1 to come out. It went on sale in May of 1977. It's the opening chapter of Marvel's surprisingly long-running licensed kaiju series. It's a pulpy, big-scale monster story that explicitly ties Godzilla into the Marvel Universe by bringing in S.H.I.E.L.D. and a handful of recognizable Marvel supporting characters. The issue is notable for Herb Trimpe's muscular monster art and Doug Munchie's brisk action first scripting. And Lord Herb Trimpe was one of my favorite artists by far because he did G.I. Joe. Loved Herb Trimpe. Still think his art would be rest in peace. Herb Trimpe passed away some time back, but man, he was the comic book artist I most was drawn to. You had Wolverine and Iron Fist and so many others. As I said, G.I. Joe. I couldn't get enough Herb Trimpe artwork in my comic books back when I was really big into it. He was definitely one of my favorites. The writer of the comic was Doug Munch, penciler, cover artist Herb Trimpe. The interior artwork, however, was finished by Jim Mooney, and the inks credited to Jim Mooney on some listings. The editor was Archie Goodwin, and it was a 30 to 36 cent comic, depending on where you lived, what country, back in the 70s. So it was one of those great old 30-cent comics. Godzilla rises from the Alaskan waters. He's left Japan, and he smashes an oil pipeline and coastal installations. Godzilla's back, and this time he is headed for America. The scale of the destruction draws S.H.I.E.L.'s attention. S.H.I.E.L.D. forms a response to the Godzilla Squad. Brings in Japanese Godzilla expert and her family to help them study and contain the creature. This, of course, sounds like every single Godzilla movie that ever was. They're just redoing it in the comics with S.H.I.E.L.D. The issue plays primarily as a spectacle and setup. Monster attacks, military reaction, first steps toward an ongoing Marvel kaiju soap opera. Now, Godzilla, of course, is your prime star. He is rendered as the unstoppable kaiju force. He is not the protagonist in this comic. He's not the antagonist. He is a force of nature. S.H.I.E.L.D. shows up, present and central to the human response. The issue establishes the Godzilla Squad. Timothy Dum Dum Duggan, Gabriel Jones, and Jimmy Woo are members of S.H.I.E.L.D. contingent. And, of course, Dum Dum Duggan and Jimmy Woo are long-established characters. I think Gabriel Jones is new to the series. Nick Fury appears. Of course, he is the head of S.H.I.E.L.D. Yuriko Takaguchi is a Godzilla expert, and her assistant is Tamara Hashioka. Her grandson, Robert Takaguchi, is brought in as local subject matter experts to advise on Godzilla. Now, Herb Trimpe's monster work. Oh, goodness. Herb Trimpe is so great on everything, but his monster work is fantastic. It makes Godzilla feel physically imposing on the page. There's big poses, crushing wreckage, kinetic layouts. His cover is a classic 1970s monster splash that sells the spectacle, and I will say this is one of the best covers of the 1970s. Doug Munch's pulpy plotting. The script keeps the pace brisk and focuses on incidents and military spy reaction rather than long character beats. That suits this first issue. Look what this thing can do. That type of approach is excellent, and I agree. The weaknesses, however, are often criticized for the tonality and continuity oddities. Book frequently oscillates between straight kaiju horror and Marvel-verse superhero spy procedurals such as S.H.I.E.L.D. It can feel awkward to readers who expect Godzilla to remain an alien anti-heroic force outside of superhero politics. The occasional art finish and inking inconsistency. Herb Trimpe's breakdowns plus finisher styles, Jim Mooney, etc., produce a slightly uneven line quality inside versus the punchy cover. And yeah, there is somewhat of a difference, you can tell. But to me, I thought it all hangs in there pretty solid. Marvel brought Godzilla into mainstream U.S. Comics continuity in 1977 through 1979 with a 24-issue run. Oh, it was 24 issues, not 12, sorry. This is the opening of that salvo. That move is historically interesting because it placed a famous Japanese kaiju squarely into Marvel's superhero espionage sandbox and exposed American mainstream comic readers to a long-form Godzilla serial. The run developed a cult following and has since been reprinted in omnibus and facsimile editions, a sign that Marvel's oddball Godzilla experiment left a lasting fan imprint despite its tonal strangeness. Marvel has reissued facsimile editions and omnibus collections both in even recent years, and that's great. I love it. So just one of those goofy 70s comics. It's Godzilla in the Marvel Universe. How are they at a loss to understand why a 6-year-old kid would find this epic? Kaiju fans who want to see Godzilla for big, destructive pieces, they're going to love this issue. Retro Marvel readers interested in weird licensed experiments where Marvel mixes its universe with outside properties like ROM and Micronauts. Those are two other examples. G.I. Joe really didn't do this. They didn't cross over, other than with the Transformers, they didn't cross over into the regular 616 Marvel Universe, whereas Godzilla did. There are collectors who value first issues of an unusual license run, although this one I don't think has any. There are a lot of issues of Godzilla #1 are out there, so I don't think it's particularly rare or anything like that. The rest of the 24-issue run to see how Marvel balances recurring monsters, S.H.I.E.L.D., and occasional crossovers. There are omnibus and facsimile reprints that are available, so you don't have to run down these little ones. these older copies. And again, none of these should be very expensive, even if you did. Godzilla Issue 1 is a rollicking, occasionally awkward introduction that trades on spectacle and nostalgia. Herb Trimpe's art and Doug Munch's pulpy pacing make it fun to read, while the Shield tie-ins and tonal shift mark it as a distinctly 1970s Marvel experiment. For fans of kaiju comics or strange crossovers, it's essential reading. For purists who want Godzilla kept apart from superhero continuity, the issue and much of the series will feel odd. And I do agree with all of that. It is a little bit totally different, but it's fun. Goodness gracious, just look at this front cover. Bright red. Godzilla streaming bright, yellow and orange fire out of his mouth, destroying a bridge, knocking down buildings. What is not to love about Marvel Comics Godzilla Issue 1, 1977, from Toho Productions, the famed movie series, now in comics form. First fantastic issue, Godzilla King of the Monsters. Look out, America, the mightiest menace of all is coming your way. And the first page also is great. I mean, it is a long-toothed, red-eyed Godzilla staring straight at the reader, about to reach out and get you. It's every monster comic lovers, love this stuff. I love this stuff too. He's chasing a long man down a pathway. He's just wreaking destruction, tearing down power lines, and all the great Godzilla stuff that we know Godzilla does from the numerous Godzilla movies that came out already by this point. This is just Godzilla being drawn in the Marvel Comics world. Finally, about mid-issue, we get our first sight of Dum Dum Dugan in his famous bowler hat and his red mustache and cigar. He's in those wonderful 1970s and 80s Shield uniforms where they were blue and dressed out in usually yellow or white, or depending on what rank you were. You could look at the uniforms, tell what rank these different people were and who was in charge. And that was a lot of fun. That was very G.I. Joe aspect. In fact, speaking of G.I. Joe, there's a scene where the Godzilla Force launches kind of a military G.I. Joe-looking group of fighters on these little flying platforms. Of course, that does zero good. Godzilla eats everybody, literally, and escapes back into the sea with Shield following close behind. They are unable to stop down or even slow Godzilla, and the first issue ends with Godzilla walking into the ocean, headed for Seattle, Washington. And we know this because the next issue is called Seattle Under Siege. And it will pick back up. The cover to issue 2 of Godzilla, not as good as issue 1. Man, they've got these bright spotlights on Godzilla. It's just, the cover's black. It doesn't really stand out that great. But again, the inside cover to issue 2 is another fantastic Godzilla stomping on people. It's just a wonderful, wonderful comic, wonderful property to have. Look, G.I. Joe would come along a few years later. Shogun Warriors would come out about the same time as Godzilla, Rom as well, Micronauts also a little bit later down the road. So you get these very strange licensed characters. And in a lot of ways, Shang-Chi, Master Kung Fu, was this. They could not use Fu Manchu in any other comics outside of that. So it created these occasional weird hang-ups. And I've often wished the comic book companies would just buy these characters straight out. It happened with Captain Marvel and DC, where they bring in Shazam in, and then he's bought, because of the lawsuit and stuff, he ends up becoming owned by DC Comics, but he's kind of left off to himself. He never really integrates in the larger DC Comics continuity very well, even to this date. He's like the Dollar General Superman. They've not ever figured out really where to put him. Rom has even came back. Like, Rom has now been collected in Collector's Edition after a desert of Rom licensing for decades. Rom, over about the last 10 years, is kind of been put back out there and is popping up in comics and books and action figures again. And Godzilla is kind of a little bit of a Godzilla renaissance going on too. especially in comic books. I'm seeing both DC Comics and Marvel Comics have licensed in Godzilla versus various members of their universe. I saw a couple really fun Godzilla versus so-and-so Hulk and others recently and kind of flipped through those, and those are pretty cool, but it's nothing like the rush of that 1970s Godzilla. Drawn in that bright, colorful style. Imagine that issue just sitting on a spinner rack. You're a 6-year-old kid, you go into the grocery store, and there, looking eyeball to eyeball with you on that spinner rack, is this 30-cent Godzilla stomping, and it's Marvel, for Pete's sake, and there's S.H.I.E.L.D. agents in there. This, you know, is going to get good. And as a kid, we didn't need all that, expository stuff. A lot of times that just slowed down the story, made them boring, you skipped over that parts or whatever. This was the fun stuff. These comics like Godzilla issue 1 from Marvel are so good. And over the years, many companies have had the license, a Dark Horse, for years and years, published Godzilla comics. And recently Dynamite and others have had the license. And now it seems like it's passed around where kind of everybody's got some sort of a bit of a piece of a Godzilla license. And with the continuing movies here in America that we've seen, the Godzilla King of the Monsters, Godzilla, Kong, Skull Island, Godzilla and Kong, and all that, since all those movies have been relatively successful here in the U.S., I'm not surprised to see more and more Godzilla, merchandise of Godzilla regularly on toy aisles now, and to see him coming back more prominent in the mainstream comic books is a pretty fun thing to see. I have to admit, is a very neat little blast of the past. Next week on our show, first, we're going out of comics for a minute. And I said we were not always going to stick in comics, not always going to be first issues or first appearances or whatever. I've got a cartoon for you. In this same year, Godzilla made his first appearance in American cartoons with the Godzilla 1977 Hanna-Barbera cartoon. I just recently rewatched episode 1 of that, and we will be talking about that next week, as we'll have a little mini Godzilla marathon here on first. And then we'll go back to pull in some great comics from the past. For everybody listening, thank you so much. Hope you will support us on Patreon at whenitwascool.com. That is why you're hearing these shows. Without our Patreon supporter, these shows end. So you'll get instant access to over 3,000, right at 3,000 podcasts. PDFs, much more books and more. Go to whenitwascool.com. Check it, $5. I mean, that's our introductory rate that gets all of our audio. You can't beat that. Try buying anything in today's world with $5. It is definitely doesn't get you a Godzilla-sized time anymore for sure. But we're going to have a little fun with this. Looking greatly forward to this series. Got lots of comics I want to talk about. So we'll be back here again soon from whenitwascool.com.
Whenitwascool.com is your source for the best in retro pop culture. When It Was Cool features articles and podcasts on retro TV and movies, toys, action figures, pro wrestling, food, video games, and more. Hit the Patreon button to support us and get instant access to hundreds of premium podcasts and features. Family friendly and fun. Whenitwascool.com.